I needed Breonna's mom and the community to know that it wasn't the grand jury that made this decision. It was Daniel Cameron in his office. Puppets. We were used as puppets.
They thought we were just going to do exactly what they told us to do, keep our mouths closed, vote on this, and walk out of that room. And it didn't happen that way.
In September, Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron convened a special grand jury to decide if any charges would be brought against the officers involved in the raid that led to Breonna Taylor's death. 2 days later, Cameron announced the jurors had decided not to bring any charges related to Taylor's death.
And a grand jury comprised of our peers and fellow citizens has made a decision.
Only 3 counts of wanton endangerment for firing into the neighbor's apartment.
I will grant the motion.
And the reaction was swift.
Daniel Cameron, you did not do your job!
Protesters were enraged. Taylor's family too, and even some of the jurors. They've asked for us not to use their names or faces for their own security.
I was at the barbershop. Quite a few people in the barbershop, and the TV was on. Everybody was watching that. Before I could get my liar out, everyone else was already hollering that.
How about you, juror number 1?
I came out of my chair and said, he just lied.
Shortly after Cameron's announcement of charges, grand juror number 1 filed a motion to allow all 12 jurors to speak publicly about what actually happened behind closed doors. Grand juries, by law, are supposed to be secret, and Cameron fought to make sure it stayed that way. But the motion was eventually granted by a judge.
Cameron did not give us a choice at this, and we didn't agree with anything he said. But I had my notes with me, because I needed for these people to understand, I didn't do this.
Juror number 2 shared notes from the trial for the first time, exclusively with Vice News. They show how he responded to and processed the evidence as it was being presented. And it's clear he wasn't satisfied with many of the officers' explanations.
You've written here, covering up. Do you remember what that was in reference to?
Yeah, the first interviews they did with the Public Integrity Unit, I felt like those guys were actually defense lawyers for the police, because they would ask them softball questions, and then they would interpret what they should be saying.
Look, you have, they lied, I believe him, written with exclamation marks. What were you referring to there?
Walker's. When Walker's interview came up, he actually disproved all the rest of them, of what they were saying. Each of the other officers had a different story. The only time their stories came together is when they said 3 phrases. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't remember.
I do not remember.
I'm not sure.
I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure.
And then they each tapped their fingers on the desk.
Yeah, I don't know.
I want to go through a few things that from the actual jury proceedings, if that's all right with you. There is at least one bullet that goes through the ceiling of Breonna Taylor's apartment, but not just through the ceiling of Breonna Taylor's apartment. There's one that goes up through the ceiling of the apartment above. And it's mentioned in the grand jury proceedings. Hopefully you can hear this okay.
There was a round that went up. Yeah. That wasn't recovered, I do not believe.
Just one round outside.
I believe it was just one.
May have been 2.
But
May
have been.
shot 2 in her.
well, you'll hear testimony later about how that may have happened, or what happened, who specifically did that. I believe one of the officers mentions doing this.
You were told the bullets through the ceiling were going to be discussed or heard in a testimony with an officer later on. Did that happen? Did you hear about the bullet through the ceiling again?
No.
No, don't recall that, no.
Don't recall it.
Was this the only case in which you were told that something would be brought up later on in a testimony, in an interview, and then it wasn't?
No,
No.
no.
In particular, jurors had a lot of questions about what happened immediately after the shooting, why the crime scene and involved officers weren't secured like they were supposed to be.
There was no organization. They was just frazzled. Then to find out that they were supposed to be isolated and have someone with them, and none of that happened. It was another failure of procedure.
They interviewed the former chief of police, Steve Conrad, and he actually talks about seeing Hankinson at the ER that night.
I saw Brent Hankinson walk through the ER. I was surprised by that because, the typical response is that someone from public integrity is usually tasked with keeping up with the officers involved to make sure that they get back here.
That interview was not played for you?
No.
Was it mentioned to you that they interviewed the former police chief?
Don't know.
No.
No.
Does that surprise you?
In this investigation, no.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's like selective evidence was not presented or withheld. But it was clear enough from listening to what we had that the officers involved, they had holes in their stories. They had holes in their holes.
What was the mood like? What was your reaction? What was the reaction in the room when the recommendations were actually presented to grand jurors?
Anger,
Shock, dismay.
betrayal.
I mean, the room erupted in a gasp, and many people said, that's all? Those are the only charges? We were expecting more.
We weren't made aware of any charges.
Of any additional charges that we could consider. And when we asked, they just said that they wouldn't apply.
What the Attorney General did was he shut down the grand jury's choices. He took our rights away from us. And then when he made that post-interview, he stood up and he lied about us.
The Attorney General's office didn't respond to a request for comment.
What do you hope happens? What do you think should happen?
Personally, I hope that there's more investigation, that it brings forth possibly other charges that can be presented to another grand jury.
I also hope for closure for Tamika, that the evidence is looked at by another grand jury. And if they are in dispute of what the possible charges are brought forward, that they'll be heard and acted on, because there should be more charges. This was criminal. They started out wrong and they just went downhill from that.